Welcome to this explainer where we're going to dive headfirst into the absolutely fascinating and honestly highly unconventional philosophical framework of author Xuefeng. Today, we're unpacking how he completely redefines the concepts of biological life and spiritual consciousness. If you've ever found yourself wondering when a life actually truly begins, or maybe why your own mind constantly feels so cluttered and just overwhelmed, well, this is a profoundly unique perspective. It kind of forces us to step back, detach from traditional ways of thinking, and look at human existence from a totally different angle. It challenges some deeply ingrained beliefs, for sure, and it asks us to reconsider the very nature of what makes us who we are.
We've got a great roadmap today. We'll start with the definition of a fetus, look at reincarnation and self-awareness, rethink the abortion debate, and then we'll shift gears into the passage of life, what clutters our consciousness, and finally, the path to emptiness. It's a journey that really shows how all these seemingly totally different concepts connect perfectly within Xuefeng's unified worldview.
All right, part one, the definition of a fetus, or as we're looking at it here, building the biological house. Let's jump right into how Xuefeng literally defines the physical starting point of human existence. So, he actually starts off by breaking down the etymology of the Chinese character for fetus. Notice how it's constructed. You've got a left part that means month and a right part that means pavilion. So, if you translate it strictly, it essentially means a house or a pavilion that's constructed over the course of roughly a month. And by his definition, a zygote or an embryo that's less than 2 months old, you can't even call it a fetus yet. It's literally just a biological mechanism. Think of it like a house that's still in the really early stages of construction, just waiting for a resident. The bricks are being laid, the foundation is poured, but nobody lives there yet. And this illustrates his foundational split perfectly. On one side, you have a biological entity, like a fertilized egg. Sure, it's growing, it's organic, but it fundamentally lacks self-awareness. So to Xuefeng, that is not a life. Because think about it, if something without self-awareness could be considered a life, well, then complex man-made machines like cars or trains, things that have moving parts and consume energy, they'd qualify too, right? On the exact opposite side is what he defines as a true philosophical life, all capital letters. The physical body is just the biological house. The self-awareness is the occupant, and without the occupant, the house is just an empty, silent structure. Moving on to section 2, reincarnation and self-awareness. Let's see how this house analogy builds into his very specific views on when that self-aware occupant actually moves in. According to Xuefeng's framework, the soul does not enter this biological house at conception. It doesn't even happen during early development. The reincarnation process happens incredibly late in the game. If you follow his timeline here from zygote to embryo, he asserts that the soul usually enters between 10 to 3 days before birth. That means the vast majority of the reincarnation process happens just days prior to delivery. It's literally right at the finish line that the soul steps into this fully built pavilion, and the entity truly becomes a life. Before those last few days, the physical form is basically just prepping a suitable environment for consciousness to eventually inhabit.
Which brings us to section 3, rethinking the abortion debate. Now, by fundamentally redefining exactly when a life begins, Xuefeng constructs a framework that completely reshapes how we view this intensely debated topic.
Now, as neutral observers of his work, we have to look at how his system challenges traditional religious views head-on. Xuefeng points out that Christianity and Buddhism generally view abortion as a sin because they believe it ends a life. But if reincarnation mechanics work exactly as he just described, this traditional view is factually flawed within his system. Early termination is basically just taking down an empty biological house because the soul hasn't even arrived yet. Plus, he argues the sheer math of it all. If every single fertilized egg contained an eternal soul, the sheer volume of biological births and premature deaths would literally blight the spiritual mechanics of reincarnation, heaven, and hell. There just wouldn't be a logical spiritual economy to support it. So he totally bypasses these standard political arguments we're all used to, and he poses this incredibly blunt, pragmatic question to people who actively preach against abortion. He asks, okay, if a young girl becomes pregnant without the financial or emotional means to support a child, and you demand she doesn't abort, are you willing to step up, nurse, and raise that child yourself? If your answer is no, he argues that preaching morality is useless, hypocritical even. He's demanding that society looks past all this abstract moralizing and faces the real, practical, boots-on-the-ground realities of human existence. All right, section 4, the passage of life. Let's pull from his 2017 essay and see how we move from the physical house to the actual spiritual plumbing that operates inside of it.
He anchors this whole concept with just a profound metaphorical rule. For something to be useful, it must be empty. Think about the water pipes in your building or the drain in your kitchen sink. Their entire purpose, their utility, relies completely on them being unobstructed. If you stuff a drain full of garbage and grease, it becomes entirely useless. The water backs up, things stagnate, the system fails. Xuefeng argues that the exact same rule applies to human consciousness. For our minds and our souls to actually function, they require empty space. And this creates a really stark contrast between two types of existence. A heaven-bound consciousness is like a perfectly clear, unblocked pipe. It's empty, freely flowing, and operates with flexibility and elegance. Because there's room for fresh water to flow, the mind stays agile. But a hell-bound consciousness, that's your heavily blocked pipe. It's weak, it's rigid, and it is totally choked by accumulated earthly debris. When your spiritual pipe is clogged like that, energy simply cannot flow. Life becomes tiring, highly possessive, and ultimately tragic, just because there's literally no room left for anything new to pass through. Which naturally leads us to Section 5, cluttering the consciousness. The big question here is, what exactly is all this dangerous clutter that's blocking our pipes? So Xuefeng lists out 8 distinct categories of clutter, and honestly, some of these are incredibly counterintuitive. I mean, sure, we'd naturally expect negative emotions like anger or fear, or materialistic things like money and status to be listed as clutter. But look closer at the others. He includes culturally celebrated things, morality, family structures, political ideals, even education and accumulated knowledge. According to Xuefeng, absolutely all of these are obstacles. They're rigid societal rules and attachments that just gunk up the free-flowing nature of your consciousness. The more of these earthly concepts and labels you stubbornly hold on to, the more trapped your spiritual plumbing becomes. So, Section 6, the path to emptiness. If virtually everything we value in society, from family to education to our personal goals, clutters us up, how does his framework suggest we actually clear the passage? To support this idea of radical detachment, he points directly to ancient philosophy. You've got Lao Tzu and Shakyamuni, the Buddha, both teaching the absolute necessity of emptying the mind. Lao Tzu spoke about the core of nothingness, of returning to being a baby, existing in this pure state before societal rules and worldly knowledge totally cluttered our heads. And similarly, Shakyamuni taught that the mind should not abide in form, sound, smell, or dharma. Basically, to find clarity and prevent suffering, your mind has to detach from external anchors and abide in absolutely nothing. And then he expands the spiritual consensus by bringing Jesus into the mix, who said, "You should be converted and become one as little child." Xuefeng is brilliantly weaving these global spiritual threads together here to prove a unified point. Whether you're looking at Eastern philosophy or Western religion, these celestial teachings across vastly different cultures all point toward the exact same mechanism. They all demand that you clear the passage of life by shedding worldly attachments and returning to this empty, uncluttered, highly receptive, childlike state. And bringing it all the way into the modern scientific era, Xuefeng uses this incredible quote from Albert Einstein. "What prevented me from thinking was the education I had received." Just let that sink in. Even one of history's greatest scientific minds recognized that accumulated knowledge and rigid educational structures actually hindered true breakthrough insight. They tell you how things are supposed to be, which blocks you from seeing how things actually are. Xuefeng extends that logic to all of humanity. He argues these rigid, cluttered structures are exactly what prevent us from achieving true peace, happiness, and freedom. So, as we wrap up this explainer of Xuefeng's worldview, going from his really distinct definition of the biological house waiting for its occupant, all the way to the profound necessity of clearing our spiritual plumbing, I want to leave you with a direct question. What cherished beliefs, knowledge, or possessions are you holding fast to right now that are currently blocking your own freedom? It's a pretty challenging thought, but hey, perhaps taking out some of that spiritual garbage is the very first step toward a clearer, more flowing life. Keep questioning the clutter, and thanks so much for exploring this framework with me today.